Hello and welcome back to my channel Checks Captures Threats, and today in episode 8 we'll be learning how to use the pawn effectively. So, from last episode we've finished the two capturing a piece and protecting a piece. Now we'll be going over how to use each piece and pawn effectively. So that will be the next 5 episodes. So, 5 examples today for this. So quite crucial because pawns are they might be only 1 point really, but obviously they can end up being 9 when they promote. So 5 examples, like I said. Now the first one is how to use a good pawn structure. The second example will be how to not have a good pawn structure. The third example will be passed pawns, how those work. The fourth example will be having pawns in the centre at the start of a game. And the last example will be having a good pawn structure in front of your king when castling. So, here is the first example. Now, here you see just a bunch of pawns. Now, this is what is a good pawn structure for both black and white. Because as you see here, they're all what we call connected. Because as you can see here, these are all connected for each team there. And here we call these pawn chains. So you see, like a chain, they all kind of connect up in diagonals like this. Though, with a pawn chain, as you can see, you have this most powerful piece that's being protected. You know, it's attacking everything here, stopping pawns from pushing, for example. The front bit's good, but when you look towards the end here, this pawn is what we call a backward pawn. This is where this pawn cannot be protected by any other pawns, and it cannot push without being captured. So obviously there, and you lose it. That is the only thing. But this, for example, isn't a backward pawn because, yes, it cannot be protected by another pawn because they physically can't, but it can push and then be protected by it. So this, if you can ever get into an endgame with a load of pawns in an endgame, for example, there, having this sort of pawn structure will at least guarantee you a draw with best play, but you've just got to be careful with any other ideas they may have. But we know how to have a good pawn structure, and this is a bad pawn structure. You can see the difference. As you can see here, when I said about connected pawns, none of these pawns are connected. As you see here, black has 2 pawn chains, and it's, as you can see, it's just so much better looking firstly, and these 2 pawns here are what we called isolated pawns. Kind of got it in the name. They are literally on their own and cannot, be supported by any other pawns. And you also see these 2 pawns here. These are called double pawns. So when a pawn captures a piece or another pawn, for example, they can double up like this. This is not very good because obviously if this can't move, this pawn can't move, for example, neither can this pawn. So it kind of has 2, unstable pawns that just won't be doing anything for the rest of the game. So if you ever do get into endgame, try your best not to have at least too many double pawns or isolated pawns. They might be just about alright to save you, but in an example like this, using the evaluation bar, we are actually 3 points down, which with best play means that they'll be able to promote and get rid of all our pawns because there's nothing being protected really here. Also, there is something that I would call them pawn islands, but there is probably different terms you can use. This is where the pawns that aren't connected and they're kind of isolated. So this would be a pawn island, for example, because it's there. This would be another pawn island. This would be another one, and that would be the last one. So it'd be 4 pawn islands, which isn't the best. Know that they're not connected. So we want as little pawn islands as possible. Okay. Now, hopefully we do not ever have to try and not get that. So, third example. This is what passed pawns are about. So obviously, again, look at the pawn structure. We have this connected pawn, an isolated pawn, these 2. But as it's whites go, yes, the episode 6 was talking about capturing a piece, talking about how there is 1 on each. But as you can see here, with the rook also protecting this pawn, what this means is it can actually push forward. Now, a passed pawn is kind of a very big fundamental in any game of chess, because most of the time that could be something you fight for, and especially big like openings sometimes have this. Passed pawns, it takes a lot of pieces away from the other team to fight for it. So that means you could do other stuff here. And in this example, we'd be able to promote, because this rook will not be able to get to it, as I say. We'll try and play a few moves. You see, it's just too late, because it cannot do that, because it can just take and promote. So, with this, it is, passed pawns are, by majority, one of the best things you can have with a pawn, when attacking. So, that is always an aim. Try and create a passed pawn. I know capturing always seems the best, you think you're always up, but here, if I did that, we was winning, but now it's dead even. We'd actually be drawing in this position. So, hopefully we understand that passed pawns are one of the most crucial points of a pawn. And now, example 4 here. Now, it's just a blank board, but here, what I'm talking about now is having pawns in the opening controlling the centre. So most of the time, when you play a game, if you're black or something, you see there immediately would play something like e4. Now this is good because it controls, these 4 centre squares is quite key for a pawn, or a knight, for example. But with the pawns, they're quite good because obviously 1 point value, trying to get rid of all of this attack. So that's why you see this move, or even sometimes d4. And this is where you kind of get this, what we call the Queen's Gambit, which hopefully by the end of this week I'll do an episode on as well, this opening, give some ideas and what to do, because obviously I haven't told you exactly how to venture into the opening and get out of it, but we'll be going over that soon, hopefully. But here, this move as well, you can see how it protects this square. So far, you've got kind of 2 of the centre points here at the 4. So having pawns in the centre is, if you don't know an opening, there is simple ideas of just having stuff like pawns in the centre, knights down, everything. But always try and have this. You don't really want to see a move like this. It doesn't really do too much. Obviously, you can get the bishop out, or this is just very bad moves, really, in my opinion. Just to have, you're not getting anywhere near this, and you kind of allow black to have this, boost and get in the centre. So that is the 4th example, and the last example for today will be, as like the last example from last episode from yesterday, was going over with castling, how it's good. Now this is about the pawn structure when castling. So both teams have castled. Obviously this, now you can see the difference. This is white castling without touching anything, and this is how black has castled with moving pawns. Now yes, this, you could say this is a very nice pawn structure, but probably not in front of the king, because now look at this massive line that this king has now got open. There is so many ways white can venture into this attack, and just get any sort of thing. Like this bishop can just come in and check already, already pushing the king, and then you can get your queen into play and everything. But as you can see here, with this stable position here, what you should always know is when castling, the best structure here for these pawns is not like this, where you try and stop a pawn there. No, these 3 like this already, you do not want to touch them. This is by far the best structure you can have, because you see here, we've just labelled the mistakes that this has. It leaves this piece is isolated and everything. So, that is all the examples for today. We now, hopefully you understand how to use pawns effectively. So from the first example, we saw how good pawn structures create at least guaranteed draws in a scenario like this. We see how bad pawn structures create, difficulties for us. Third example, how passed pawns are a crucial part of the game. Always want to try and create one, because obviously we all want to try and promote and get that extra queen, or whatever, rook, whatever you can promote to. In this example, we went over how pawns in the centre is crucial in the opening to try and stabilise a good position and hopefully get that, get that edge over black immediately, or white, whatever side you're playing. And last example, we ran over how the king can be well protected with just the pawns already as it is, with the rook just staying like this, because as we can see, there is just so much difficulties again with black in this scenario with an open king and not the best pawns here. So that is the end of today's video. Next episode we'll be going over another how to use, and it'll probably be a piece. It's either going to be the rook or the knight or bishop, one of the three yet, I'm not too sure, but it'll be one of those three, and we'll be doing that for the next 5 or so episodes. Hopefully by the end of the week as well I can get a opening video out, so that can be fun. And that's the end of the video, so thank you and bye bye.